Officer Luke Marston had returned to Maple Ridge Cemetery more times than he could count.
It's okay. I'm here.
For a man like him, built from duty and silence, it was easier to face ghosts than people. But nothing had prepared him for what waited at the foot of Sean Kessler's grave that afternoon. The rain came down hard, slicing through the grey sky like something personal. Luke pulled his coat tighter, his boots sinking into the soft earth with each step up the hill. Wind tugged at the branches overhead, pine needles clinging to his shoulders, the smell of wet bark heavy in the air. Sean's grave sat beneath an old sycamore, its limbs bare and brittle. The headstone was simple. Detective Sean Kessler, beloved partner, 1983 to 2022. Luke had etched that date into memory. He'd been there when the call came in. He'd held Sean's hand as backup arrived too late, and he'd buried his own peace of mind with the man in that soil. But today something was different. A figure knelt by the headstone. Not a person, at least not the kind that wore boots or spoke words. It was a dog, large, soaked to the bone, trembling. Its coat, once likely black and tan, was now streaked with mud and dull from malnutrition. Scars cut through patches of fur, and one ear hung limp, torn. The animal didn't notice Luke at first. Its head rested gently against the stone, chest rising in shallow, broken rhythms. And then it made a sound that stopped Luke cold, a low, cracked whimper. Not from hunger, not from pain, from grief. Luke's breath caught. Number, it couldn't be. He took a cautious step forward. The dog's ears flicked, its head lifted, eyes meeting his. Amber eyes, familiar and unforgettable. The collar was old, frayed, barely hanging on. But the nameplate was still there. Axel. Luke's voice was barely more than a whisper, as if saying the name too loud would shatter whatever this was. Axel had died a year ago. That's what they all believed. That's what the report said after the raid on the old warehouse. Gunfire, chaos, shorn down, the K9 unit presumed lost in the fire. No body, no trace, just smoke and silence. But Axel was here, alive, weeping, and Luke, who had held it together for 12 months, who hadn't let a single tear fall for Sean Kessler, suddenly felt something crack inside him. "Axel?" he said again, this time louder. The shepherd staggered upright, unsteady on his legs. For a split second, the dog hesitated, then moved toward him, cautiously, as if memory fought with fear. Luke dropped to one knee, extending a hand palm up. "I'm not going to hurt you, boy." "It's me." Luke Axel's nose twitched. Rain ran off the tip of his snout. Then slowly, he leaned in and pressed his head against Luke's hand. His fur was cold, wet, and bristled with old wounds. Luke could feel every rib, every tremble. "What the hell happened to you?" Lightning split the sky behind them, and thunder rolled over the hills like a drumline of war. But Luke didn't. Move neither did Axel. They stayed like that, crouched beside the grave of the man who had once been everything to both of them. The world could keep raining all it wanted. Axel was alive, and that changed everything. Luke finally wrapped both arms around the dog, pulling him close. Axel didn't resist. He collapsed against the officer's chest, body heavy with exhaustion, with trauma. His breathing was shallow, his muscles twitched beneath the skin. But still, he stayed. Behind them, the wind rattled the leaves. The storm didn't care. But Luke did. He took off his jacket, draping it over the shepherd. Then he stood, cradling the dog like a wounded soldier. The cemetery was silent again, except for the sound of Axel's shallow breath and the soft creak of Luke's boots in the wet grass. "You're coming home with me," he said, voice hard with new purpose. "We're going to find out what they did to you. Who left you like this?" And why no one told the truth Axel stirred in his arms. It was faint, but there, a soft whine, not of pain, of acknowledgement, of trust. Luke turned from the grave, casting one last look at Sean's headstone. His partner was gone. But something of him had survived, in the loyalty of a dog that refused to die, refused to forget. And whatever storm had started a year ago, it wasn't over. Not yet. Luke Marston drove through sheets of rain, the old Crown Vic's wipers thudding in a slow, tired rhythm. The highway out of Maple Ridge was nearly deserted at this hour, just wet asphalt and distant pine shadows. In the passenger seat, Axel lay curled in Luke's jacket, his ribs rising and falling too fast, his breath fogging the window. Luke kept glancing over, unable to stop himself. The dog barely moved, but the tremor in his limbs hadn't let up since the cemetery. That same tremor had been in Sean's hands once, after their first gunfight. That same haunted look in the eyes. The road curved toward Luke's cabin at the edge of the woods, a simple one-story place built for solitude and silence. No security lights, no neighbors, just the hum of a creek and the groan of old pines. He parked close, cut the engine, and sat still for a beat, hands locked on the wheel. Then he turned to Axel. "Let's get you warm, partner." Inside, the cabin smelled of cedarwood and ashes. The fireplace had been dead for 2 days, but Luke got it roaring in minutes, piling logs like he'd done 1,000 times. He laid Axel on a thick wool blanket beside it and knelt beside him, eyes scanning every inch. Now, in the flicker of firelight, Luke saw what the rain had hidden. The fur on Axel's neck was thinned and raw, ringed by scabbed-over wounds that told of chains too tight, too long. Scars wrapped around his hindquarters, old and knotted like healed-over burns. His front left paw was swollen, one claw cracked and darkened with dried blood. The shepherd's chest moved in shallow bursts, each breath more labored than the last. Luke swallowed hard. "What the hell did they do to you?" Axel opened one eye at the sound of Luke's voice, but didn't lift his head. He didn't have the strength, but he didn't pull away either. Luke stood and went to the drawer by his desk. From it, he pulled an old handheld scanner, the kind they used at shelters and animal control for strays with microchips. The thing still worked. He flipped the switch, heard the hum, and returned to Axel. "All right, let's see who still thinks you're dead." He moved the scanner slowly over Axel's shoulder blades, just beneath the nape. A faint beep chirped. The screen lit up. But instead of a full registry, there was only a line of static and a partial ID number. No handler name, no unit, no service record. Just a broken string of characters blinking back at him like a ghost. Luke stared. "What the—" He ran it again. Same result. A chip was there, but the database had been wiped. Not corrupted, not expired. Erased. Deliberately. Luke had worked enough missing persons cases and Chi-9 unit reviews to know what that meant. Microchips didn't fail like this on their own. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had intentionally cleared Axel's identity, his career, his existence, from the system. His pulse ticked up. They hadn't just left Axel to die. They'd tried to erase the fact he ever lived. He stood slowly, backing toward the desk. His fingers moved on muscle memory, pulling up old K-9 registration systems, encrypted backups, even a forensic database of military service animals. Nothing. No Axel. No serial match. He was off the grid. Luke turned to look at the dog again. Axel hadn't moved, but his eyes were open now, locked on Luke with an eerie stillness. Not fearful, not pleading, knowing. "You know who did this," Luke said under his breath. The fire popped, shooting sparks onto the stone hearth. Outside, wind shook the branches against the windows. Luke moved to the sink, filled a bowl with warm water, and returned to Axel. Gently, he began cleaning the dog's wounds with a soft cloth, 1 inch at a time. Axel didn't growl. He didn't flinch. but his muscles stayed tight, every nerve still wired for pain. Luke whispered as he worked, "I don't know how you made it back." "But you did. You walked out of hell and straight to Sean's grave. That's not instinct. That's memory." The cloth turned red. Luke rinsed it and kept going. "You saw something that night, didn't you?" "Something nobody put in the reports." He paused. His voice dropped lower. "You weren't just left behind. You were taken." Axel shifted, a faint, strained whine escaping his throat. It wasn't random. Luke felt it. The dog remembered. Luke wrapped the shepherd in a thick blanket and sat cross-legged beside him, watching the firelight dance in Axel's tired eyes. They were old eyes now, older than any dog his age should have had. Eyes that had seen too much, carried too much, and still came home. Luke reached out, resting a hand on the dog's scarred chest. "You stayed alive for a reason, buddy. Now it's my turn." Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the cabin stayed warm. The wind whispered against the windows, but neither man nor dog moved. Axel closed his eyes, and for the first time since the raid, Luke didn't feel alone. Not in the way that mattered. The clinic sat at the edge of town, tucked between an old feed store and a shuttered bakery that hadn't reopened since the flood 2 years back. Its hand-painted sign read, "Doctor." Laura Bennett, DVM, faded but still hanging straight. Luke pulled up just after sunrise. The rain had thinned to mist, casting the parking lot in a pale silver hue. Axel stirred in the passenger seat, lifting his head slightly as Luke killed the engine. The shepherd's eyes tracked the movement of a bird fluttering along the fence, but his body stayed curled, conserving energy. Luke glanced over. "You're not gonna like it, buddy. But we need answers." He opened the door, stepped into the cold morning air, and walked around to lift Axel carefully from the seat. The dog didn't protest, just leaned into Luke's arms with a quiet trust that cut deep. They'd only been reunited for a day, but it felt like a bond born of years. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and pine. A small bell rang as they entered. Laura Bennett appeared from the back, tying her dark hair into a messy knot. Her lab coat was streaked with paw prints and fur, her sleeves rolled up. She paused when she saw them. "Luke?" She blinked, stepping forward. It's Axel," Luke said simply. Laura's hand went to her mouth. "But I thought he died with Sean. Everyone did." Luke said, voice flat. "He didn't." Laura crossed the room quickly, her eyes misting as she crouched beside them. She reached out slowly, her fingers hovering just short of Axel's fur. "May I?" Luke nodded. Axel didn't flinch when her hand touched him. Laura guided them into the exam room, switching on a soft overhead light. Luke set Axel gently on the padded table. The shepherd winced at the movement but made no sound. For the next 15 minutes, Laura worked in silence, her hands precise, her expression darkening with each discovery. She inspected his ears, lifted his paws, parted his fur with gloved fingers. Luke watched, jaw tight. Finally, she stepped back, pulling off her gloves. "He's been through hell," she said quietly. "And not just random trauma. These scars, they're patterned, repeated strikes, mostly with blunt instruments, ankles worn raw from restraints, burn marks along the haunches. Some of this is old, healed wrong, but some is recent." Luke nodded once, already expecting it. "Intentional?" Laura's voice hardened. "No question." She moved to a cabinet, pulled out a tablet, and tapped through a series of images. "I've seen this before. A few months back, a stray came in. Same injuries, same dead eyes. No chip, no record. Rumor was he escaped from an illegal training compound just outside state lines. A place where dogs are conditioned for transport runs, protection jobs, even underground fights. Most don't make it out. Luke's voice was low. You think that's where Axel's been? I'd bet my license on it, she said, and someone went to a lot of trouble to erase him from every registry. Axel shifted on the table. His eyes locked onto Laura's, then Luke's. There was no fear in them, only memory. Luke stepped forward. You said before, you've heard rumors? Laura hesitated. Nothing official. Small towns don't talk openly when money's involved, but there's one name that's come up more than once. Wade Holloway. The name sat heavy in the room. Luke's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Wade Holloway was a land baron, owner of the largest livestock operation in 3 counties. He hosted charity auctions and funded the new fire station. But years ago, during the investigation into Sean's death, his name had been scribbled into the margins of Luke's notebook. A witness had claimed seeing a Holloway truck near the raid site that night. The tip had gone nowhere. Too rich, too insulated, too connected. Laura read Luke's expression. I know what you're thinking, she said, but you'll need more than scars and suspicions. Luke's voice came cold. Then I'll get more. He lifted Axel gently off the table. The dog let out a breath, weary but grounded. Laura followed them to the door, her face pale under the clinic light. I'll dig through my records, she said. If I find anything, photos, patterns, even whisper networks, I'll call. Luke nodded. I'll be ready. As he stepped outside, the sun broke faintly through the mist, casting long shadows down Main Street. The town was waking up, unaware that a ghost had returned among them, and that truth was beginning to rise from the ashes. Inside the truck, Axel shifted in his seat. Luke buckled in and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. He looked over at the shepherd. We're not done, partner. You came back for a reason. Let's find out why. Axel stared forward, ears tilted slightly. Not quite alert, but not gone. Outside, a Holloway feed and supply truck rolled past them, the logo freshly painted on the side. Axel's body went rigid. He growled, low, steady, deep from his chest. Luke followed the truck with his eyes, jaw tight. That was no coincidence. That was memory. And memory didn't lie. The old manila folder sat on Luke's kitchen table like a wound that had never quite closed. The report from the night Sean Kessler died was creased, coffee-stained, and familiar to the point of nausea. He had read every line 100 times. But now, with Axel lying nearby, watching him with those deep amber eyes, Luke opened it again with a different weight in his chest. Axel didn't move. He lay on the braided rug, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at the sound of rustling paper. Luke sifted through witness statements, tactical maps, blurry crime scene photos. The official story had always sat wrong with him. The warehouse raid had gone south. Shots fired, Kessler hit. Fire started by unknown parties. In the chaos, Axel had vanished, presumed dead. Luke had never questioned that part, until now. He reached a page near the back of the file, a photograph snapped by a traffic cam 3 blocks from the warehouse, time-stamped less than an hour after the explosion. It showed a grainy image of a dark pickup truck pulling out of a service alley. No plate, no driver ID, just a shape, a movement. Luke laid it on the table. Axel's ears pricked. The shepherd rose slowly, eyes locked on the photo. What is it, bud? Luke asked. Axel stepped closer, nostrils flaring. Then, without warning, he barked, sharp, loud, and direct. One paw shot up, landing on the edge of the photo. His tail stiffened, his body tense. Luke blinked. That truck? Axel barked again, faster this time, then looked straight at Luke as if demanding he understand. Luke stared at the image. The truck had barely registered to him before. But Axel knew it. Not a guess. Recognition. Luke grabbed his phone and snapped a high-res scan of the image. Then he returned to the file, digging through maps of the raid perimeter. That alley had led north, toward the tree line, and beyond that, the deep woods no one had searched. He traced a finger along a logging road on the map. It connected back to a string of old fire trails and then dead-ended near Holloway's land. His breath caught. "Did they take you out that way?" he asked, more to himself than to the dog. Axel whined, low and urgent. Luke folded the folder shut, grabbed his keys, and looked down. "You remember. You're not just here to heal, are you?" Axel turned, heading to the door without waiting. His limp was more noticeable now, but his steps were steady, deliberate. He was ready. They drove with the windows half-cracked to let in the cool pine air. Axel sat upright in the passenger seat, his body alert. Every time the road curved toward the mountains, his head tilted as if following a memory map no one else could see. Luke's hands stayed tight on the wheel. He didn't speak. This wasn't a lead anymore. This was a trail. 40 minutes outside town, the pavement ended and gravel took over. The truck bounced over ruts, mud splashing up the sides. Old pine needles blanketed the path, muffling the tires. The forest closed in around them, tall, dark, familiar. Axel shifted suddenly, body tensing, his nose pressed to the glass. Then he let out a short, sharp bark and pawed at the dashboard. Luke slowed, scanning the roadside. Nothing at first, just dense brush and silence. Then he saw it, a break in the trees, barely visible. A narrow trail, overgrown, once used but long since forgotten. Luke pulled over and cut the engine. Axel jumped out before he could stop him, moving stiffly but fast towards the trailhead. Luke followed, drawing his flashlight and resting his hand on the grip of his sidearm. The forest was silent. Too silent. They moved for 10 minutes through brush and mud, Luke using the flashlight to scan ahead. Then Axel stopped cold. His ears stood high. He growled, not loud but low and constant. Luke raised the beam. Ahead was a clearing. A small, collapsed shack leaned against a slope of earth. The roof had caved partially, but the walls still stood. Metal scraps littered the area. An old kennel cage sat rusting in the corner, its door twisted open. A length of chain lay coiled in the mud like a dead snake. Axel growled again, then stepped forward, slowly, nose down, tail rigid. Luke followed him into the clearing. The shack smelled of rot and rust. Inside, old straw still clung to the floor. Scratches marred the wooden walls. Claw marks, deep ones, desperate, the kind a dog makes when it's trying to escape. Luke's throat tightened. This had been a prison. Axel padded over to one corner and began pawing at the dirt. Luke knelt beside him, brushing aside leaves. Underneath, half buried, was a tattered scrap of fabric. Luke picked it up. Faded blue. Smelled of mold and something else. He turned it over. A logo. Holloway Feed and Supply. Partial but unmistakable. Luke stared at it, mind racing. The same logo he'd seen on the truck earlier that day. The same company that owned 100 miles of forest no one dared touch. Axel sat beside him, staring at the scrap, then looking up at Luke. "We're in it now." Luke murmured, "You were taken. Held, beaten, and someone wanted you forgotten." He folded the fabric into his jacket pocket, stood, and looked around once more. The trees were whispering again, wind sliding through their branches like secrets. Axel turned back toward the trail, ready to leave. But Luke stood there another minute, staring at the place that had once held the dog who never quit. This wasn't just a lead, it was proof. And Axel, silent, scarred, steady, wasn't just remembering. He was guiding. And now Luke was ready to follow. The wind had shifted. Luke could feel it in the trees, hear it in the way the pine boughs moved against each other with a sharper hiss. Axel walked ahead of him, just off the trail, nose low, ears forward. They had left the makeshift clearing and followed an overgrown animal path deeper into the forest, further than any patrol unit had ever bothered to search. It wasn't a place people stumbled into. Axel stopped suddenly. His whole body stiffened, tail lowered, and his breath hitched. He turned his head toward Luke, eyes alert, and then trotted forward into a thicket of brush. Luke pushed through the undergrowth behind him, flashlight sweeping the dark. The air was cooler here, almost stagnant. When he emerged on the other side, his boot caught on a root and he nearly stumbled. Then he saw it. A cabin, if it could still be called that. More like a skeleton of one. The wood was rotted in places, the roof bowed in, half its shingles blown off. The walls were patched with mismatched boards, some spray-painted, some black with mildew. A rusted barrel lay collapsed by the side. The whole structure leaned against a slope, partially buried in dirt. Axel approached slowly, growling low. Luke drew his service pistol on instinct. His finger stayed off the trigger, but his senses sharpened. Everything about this place felt wrong. The smell came next, metallic, earthy, decayed, like something old that had been rotting too long beneath leaves. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Luke nudged it with the toe of his boot. It creaked open an inch. Axel pushed past him into the darkness without hesitation. "Axel!" Luke hissed, but the dog was already inside. Luke followed, sweeping the flashlight across the interior. The first thing he noticed was the floor. Dirt packed tight, clawed in places. Near the far corner lay a length of rusted chain, its end attached to a buried spike in the ground. Dried blood still stained the links. Luke crouched, fingers brushing the chain. Axel stood nearby, staring at it, unmoving. His growl deepened. The beam of light caught something else, a metal food bowl, dented and kicked aside. Nearby, scraps of bone, chicken bones, gnawed down, hollowed, splinters of desperation. Luke swallowed, his stomach knotting. This wasn't a cabin. It was a cage. His flashlight flicked up toward the walls, long scratch marks carved into the wood. Patches of fur caught in the splinters. A heavy collar, broken, lay half buried in the dirt. "Jesus," Luke whispered. Axel moved toward a corner, started pawing the ground. Luke knelt beside him, helping pull away the top layer of dirt. Within seconds, he found something soft. Fabric. He lifted it gently, a torn piece of canvas, dirty and faded. He turned it over, printed in dark green letters, barely visible beneath the grime, Holloway Feed Company. Luke's jaw tightened. He held the fabric to the flashlight, studying it. It was part of a feed sack or work apron. No doubt about the logo. It was the same one on Wade Holloway's trucks, warehouses, and uniforms. He stood slowly, heart pounding. So this was it. The rumors, the pain, the silent testimony of a dog who came home from the dead. It all pointed here. Luke stepped outside, the cold air hitting him like a slap. He took a few paces back and looked at the cabin from a distance. How many others had been brought here? How many didn't survive? Behind him, Axel let out a low, sustained whine. Not fear, recognition. Luke turned and knelt beside him, gripping the shepherd's shoulder. "They chained you here," he said softly, "and you got out." You made it out. Axel didn't move, but his eyes said everything. Luke stood and pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the cabin, the bones, the chain, the cloth. He sent one to Laura with a message. Found it. He wasn't the only one. Then he sent another, to a number he hadn't used in months. "Deputy Monroe. Need you. Quiet. North Woods. Tell no one. He tucked the phone away and scanned the forest. It was too quiet, too still. Axel barked once, sharp, not loud but urgent. Luke turned and saw something half buried in the dirt beneath the trees. Tire tracks. Fresh. They were not alone. He stepped back toward the truck, keeping Axel close. The forest had watched this place for a long time, hidden its secrets beneath needles and moss. But the dog who had suffered in silence had returned, not to remember, to reveal. And Luke wasn't going to let it stay buried again. The office of the Raven County Sheriff smelled faintly of old coffee, dust, and the subtle tension that comes when the truth knocks on a door nobody wants to open. Luke sat across from Captain Ellis Dorsey, a man whose voice rarely rose above a murmur, but who carried weight in this town. The kind of man whose handshake closed deals and whose silence meant more than most people's words. Dorsey leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His badge glinted under the soft fluorescent lights. "You really want to stir this up, Luke?" he said, calm but loaded. "After all this time?" Luke didn't blink. "We found a structure in the northern woods. Blood, bones, restraints. Axel recognized the place. It's where they kept him." Dorsey sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're chasing ghosts?" "No, sir," Luke said. "I'm following a living witness." "And the evidence is real." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Wade Holloway has done a lot for this town. He's funded the new community center, paid off hospital debt. Folks trust him." Luke felt the heat rise in his chest. Folks trusted the pastor who got caught laundering drug money too. Doesn't make it right. Dorsey's tone dropped. Quiet. Final. "I'm telling you to walk lightly, Marston. There's no case without a warrant, and no warrant without a judge willing to sign off. And around here, that door's closed." Luke stood slowly, jaw tight. "Then I'll find another way in." He turned and walked out before Dorsey could answer, Axel following close at his side. The dog moved with a slight limp, but every step was steady, determined. Outside, the sun was fading behind the hills. Main Street glowed with the soft flicker of neon signs and early porch lights. The town looked peaceful, but Luke had seen too many peaceful facades hide rot underneath. At the truck, he opened the passenger door for Axel, then paused. A figure was leaning against the lamppost across the street. Worn flannel. Work boots caked with dust. A baseball cap pulled low over tired eyes. Nate Weller. Luke hadn't seen him in years. They'd served together in Afghanistan. Nate had been a combat medic. After the war, he came home. Quiet, like a man trying to forget how loud the world could get. Now he drove delivery trucks for half the town, never talked much, never asked for attention. Nate raised one hand in a subtle wave, then jerked his chin toward the alley behind the diner. Luke nodded and followed. They met behind the building, out of sight from the street. Nate lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, then took a drag without looking up. "You still don't know when to quit, do you?" he said. Luke kept his voice low. "Tell me you know something." Nate pulled a flash drive from his pocket and handed it over. "I was running feed supplies up toward Holloway's land 2 weeks ago. Late run. Saw something I shouldn't have." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Camera." Nate nodded. "Dash cam. Forgot it was even on. You'll want to watch it alone." Luke took the drive. "What did you see?" Nate looked up, eyes sharper now. 2 trucks. Flatbeds, marked with Holloway feed, heading toward the back trails, each stacked with big wooden crates. Not livestock crates. Those were sealed too tight. Guarded. No lights, no license plates. Luke's stomach sank. "That the night of the storm?" "Yeah," Nate said. "They move in bad weather, easier to stay off radar." "And you didn't tell anyone?" Nate gave a bitter laugh. "Tell who?" "Holloway's got a line to every county seat between here and Red Rock. One word from me and I'm out of a job. Or worse. Luke looked at him. So why now? Nate flicked the cigarette into a puddle. Because Sean was a good man. And you don't stop. I figured if anyone could blow this open, it'd be you. They stood in silence. Then Nate added, quieter. Be careful. You're knocking on a door that people paid a lot to keep shut. Luke nodded, then turned back toward the truck. That night, inside his cabin, Luke plugged the flash drive into his laptop. Axel lay beside the fireplace, eyes half closed but still watchful. The footage opened with grainy dashcam footage. Static, then headlights cutting through mist. 2 trucks appeared. Dark green. No markings on the cab doors. But the crates, huge wooden boxes, chained down tight, covered in tarps. One shifted slightly. The outline inside wasn't square, it was hunched. Moving. Luke froze the frame. Next came a brief flash of a man stepping from the second truck. Tall, broad-shouldered, a bandana over his face. But the build was unmistakable. Calvin Rourke, Wade Holloway's cousin. Luke hit pause, leaned back, and stared at the screen. They were moving animals, not legal ones, not livestock, dogs, fighters, couriers, victims. He looked down at Axel, who hadn't moved, but his eyes were open now, locked on the screen. You remember him, don't you? Axel gave a soft growl, low and steady. Luke whispered, Then we're going back into the woods. But this time, not just to remember. He looked back at the screen, jaw set. No more knocking. Time to break the door down. The moon hung low over the Holloway property, its glow obscured by fast-moving clouds. The air was thick with humidity and silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. Luke crouched behind the ridgeline with Laura Bennett to his right, and 2 federal agents just behind them. Everyone wore black tactical gear, vests zipped, earpieces crackling quietly. Down below, the farm looked deceptively still. Barns tucked into shadow, lights dimmed to slits in the windows. But Luke knew better. He had watched the footage. He had seen the crates. This place wasn't for livestock. It was a factory for cruelty. Laura adjusted the strap on her medical bag. She wasn't a soldier, but she'd insisted on coming. If we find them, she'd said, they'll need someone who knows how to stop the bleeding. Luke had only nodded. He hadn't needed to ask if she was ready. Axel crouched low beside him, eyes forward, body taut like a drawn bow. His injury hadn't fully healed, but the dog had refused to stay behind. He moved with the quiet precision of a soldier returned to his battlefield. A voice crackled in Luke's earpiece. We're green. They moved, through the tree line, across a ditch, and into the outer edge of the property. The grass was tall, unkempt, the scent of hay and diesel thick in the air. They bypassed the main gate, slipping around the side of the largest barn. Luke signaled for the others to hold. He pulled a lockpick set from his vest and moved to the rusted padlock on the side entrance. It wasn't new. It had been replaced recently, shiny metal against weathered wood. That alone was a clue. 3 clicks. The lock popped. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like an animal waking. What hit them first was the smell. Faces, ammonia, blood. The flashlight swept the space. Rows of cages, dozens, all metal stacked too high. Inside were dogs, shepherds, Malinois, even a few Dobermans. Some barked as the light hit them, others shrank back, eyes wide with trauma. Scarred muzzles, raw paws, ribs visible beneath filthy coats. Laura gasped. One of the agents muttered, Jesus! Luke stepped inside, Axel moving ahead of him. One of the dogs in the closest cage whimpered. Axel stopped, turned toward it, and let out a low, steady sound. Almost like a hum. The other dog fell silent, ears flicking. Communication. Luke moved to the center aisle. A clipboard hung from a nail on the support beam. He grabbed it, flipped through. Names, weights, notes scribbled in shorthand. One phrase repeated again and again. "Runner ready." He didn't have time to dwell. The radio hissed in his ear. "Movement. East barn. 3 bodies." Armed Luke looked to the others. They know. Before anyone could respond, gunfire erupted outside. Muffled cracks, then shouting. Red lights danced through the cracks in the boards. "Go loud!" Someone barked over the radio. The barn exploded into chaos. One of the agents moved to the door, weapon drawn. "We hold..." "Here." More gunfire echoed, closer now. A side door burst open. Wade Holloway stepped in, rifle in hand, flanked by 2 men in camo and masks. His face was red with rage, sweat slicking his forehead. "I told them not to poke around!" He roared. He raised his weapon toward Luke. Everything happened fast. The muzzle flashed. Luke dove. But before the shot could land, Axel launched. It was a blur of fur and muscle. The shepherd hit Wade mid-chest, teeth sinking into his arm just as the rifle fired wide. Wade screamed, stumbled back, trying to shake Axel loose. The other 2 men raised their weapons. Luke rolled behind a hay bale, fired. One man dropped, shot in the leg. Laura ducked behind a cage, dragging a bleeding agent to cover. Axel still held on. Wade crashed against the wall, his arm a mess of torn flesh. He finally slammed Axel with the butt of the rifle, sending the dog skidding across the floor. Luke shouted, "Axel!" The dog struggled, legs kicking against the concrete, trying to rise. Luke stood and fired again, hitting the last man square in the chest. Wade fumbled for his weapon, bleeding and panicked. "Drop it!" Luke barked. Wade froze. Sirens cut through the night. Federal backup. Red and blue lights lit the yard like fireworks, casting the inside of the barn in surreal color. Agents stormed in from both entrances, shouting commands, guns raised. Wade dropped his weapon. He was tackled to the floor. Luke rushed to Axel. The shepherd lay still for a moment, then tried to lift his head. Blood stained his side, but his eyes were alert. "You held the line," Luke whispered, kneeling beside him. Axel gave a soft grunt and rested his head against Luke's leg. Laura ran over, already pulling gauze from her bag. "We'll stop the bleeding," she said, "but he needs real treatment." "I'll get him there," Luke said, his voice rough. Outside, the agents began freeing the cages. Dogs stumbled into the open, some whimpering, some barking as if testing their own voices again. One by one, they stepped into freedom. Luke watched them, hand still on Axel. This was what the dog had come back for. Not just survival, justice, liberation. And tonight, under the weight of gunpowder and sirens, the locked door had finally blown open. The dust hadn't settled yet. Red and blue lights pulsed across the Holloway ranch, slicing through the smoke still curling from the shattered barn doors. Dogs barked in confusion and relief. Agents moved swiftly, securing the area and herding the remaining canines into waiting trailers lined with blankets, food, and gentle hands. But amid the noise, Wade Holloway knelt in the gravel, cuffed and bloodied, his face a mix of fury and humiliation. His shirt was torn where Axel's teeth had torn into him. Laura stood over him, arms crossed, her eyes not angry, but hollowed by disbelief. "You ran fundraisers for rescue shelters," she said, voice low. "You cried on television when that tornado hit, fought Clay. You passed out food to veterans." Wade looked up, face flushed, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "People believe what they want to believe." He muttered, "All I did was give them a story they could feel good about." Laura didn't flinch. "You used their trust to traffic dogs. You turned war animals into drug mules. You think they cared about those dogs after the cameras left?" He snapped back. They were disposable. You know it. I just gave them a purpose again. She stared at him for a long moment, then, without a word, turned and walked away. But Luke had been watching from a distance, standing beside Axel, who lay slumped against his leg. The shepherd was bleeding again, not as badly as before, but enough to drain the colour from Luke's face. A paramedic crouched beside them, speaking softly into his radio. We need to move now. He's crashing. Axel stirred at the sound, legs twitching. Luke leaned in. You're not done yet, buddy. You held on this long. The paramedic lifted Axel carefully onto a stretcher. Luke followed them towards the emergency van, refusing to leave the dog's side. Every few seconds, Axel's eyes fluttered open. Not panicked, just present. Still guarding. Still watching Luke like he'd done since that first day in Kandahar. Inside the command tent, agents reviewed footage pulled from the barn cameras. The monitor showed Wade shaking hands with a man in a pressed blazer, silver hair glinting under the security lights. Who's that? One of the agents asked. No name in the system. No badge entry. No heat signature logged. Whoever he was, he'd slipped through. And while Wade was now shackled in the back of a black SUV, the man behind him had vanished. Just like that, the trail frayed. Back outside, Laura stood alone near the pen of rescued dogs. Many of them had begun to settle, lying down, sniffing the hay, pressing into one another for warmth. But one young Malinois wouldn't rest. He paced back and forth, eyes locked on the road, as if searching for someone. Laura crouched beside the pen. You'll be safe now. No one's going to hurt you again. The dog stopped pacing, came to the edge of the fence, Saturday, and then licked her hand, a single flash of trust. Luke approached from behind. His jacket was stained with blood. Axel's. He's stable, he said quietly. But they're rushing him to a trauma center in Charleston. They don't know yet if he'll keep the leg. Laura nodded, then glanced at the dog beside her. You think they'll ever forget what happened to them? Luke didn't answer right away. No, he finally said. But maybe they'll learn something new, like what it feels like to be safe. She looked at him. And Wade. He'll talk. He's scared now. But the guy who pulled his strings is still out there. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Luke added, And Axel? Even with the wound, he crawled to his feet when he heard Wade raise his voice again. Wouldn't let me go alone. Laura smiled softly. He never really left the fight. No, Luke said. He's the one who never stopped believing we could win it. As the ambulance pulled away, tail lights disappearing down the gravel path, Axel's head rested on the stretcher beside the window. He didn't move, but his eyes were still open, still guarding, still between two worlds, the one of war and the one that might finally give him peace. And as the first light of dawn broke across the tree line, something about that image, an old soldier still holding watch, felt like a promise. One Luke intended to keep. The sun spilled gold across the freshly cut grass of Millstone Park, soft light dancing through the old sycamore trees as a crowd began to gather. Rows of white chairs lined the field. Kids clutched paper flags. Veterans in pressed uniforms stood at quiet attention. For the first time in years, the town wasn't holding a fall festival or a county fair. Today was about the dogs. At the center of the makeshift stage stood a podium, wrapped in a simple navy cloth. Behind it, a carved wooden plaque read, Valor K9 Recognition Ceremony. On either side, handlers knelt beside their partners, some sitting proud and alert, others a little grayer, a little slower, but still every inch warriors. And then, at the far edge of the stage, came Axel. He walked unevenly, favoring his right side. His left eye was covered with a small black patch sewn into his tactical harness, more for comfort than function. The scars on his muzzle had faded into silver threads. He was thinner now, quieter, but his tail lifted slightly as he saw the crowd part for him and Luke. No one clapped just yet. They just watched in silence. Because something about the way Axel moved, the way he scanned the crowd, ears twitching, every muscle ready despite everything he'd lost, reminded them why they were really here. Luke helped him up the 2 wooden steps to the platform. Axel hesitated, then took them himself. One, then the other. The crowd finally broke. Applause rang out. A few veterans wiped at their eyes. Laura stepped to the podium. Her voice was steady but thick. Axel served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He saved lives in Kandahar, in Fallujah, and, more recently, here at home. 3 weeks ago, despite being wounded, Axel protected his handler from gunfire in the line of duty. Today, we recognize him not just for courage in combat, but for his enduring loyalty when no one was watching. She turned slightly, looking down at him. Axel is hereby awarded the title of Valor K9. The mayor, hands trembling slightly, approached with a small medal hung on a thick blue ribbon. He didn't drape it around Axel's neck. Axel hated things around his head, but knelt to gently press it against the dog's shoulder. Axel didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood. Like he knew the ceremony continued, honoring other K9s rescued from the Holloway property. Some would be rehabilitated and rehomed. A few, like the young Malinois Laura had bonded with, were already starting their new lives with gentle guidance and slower mornings. And then came the part no one had expected. Luke took the mic briefly. "There's one more name I want spoken today." He paused. "Sean Kessler." The crowd murmured, some confused, others uncomfortable. Luke let it settle. 2 years ago, this town turned its back on him, accused him of hurting Axel, said he snapped, that he shouldn't have come home at all. But that story was never true. Sean lived with ghosts none of us could see. He didn't hurt Axel. He tried to save him. He looked down at Axel, and Axel never stopped waiting for him. On a nearby screen, they played the old footage Nate had found. Sean kneeling by Axel, whispering something in the dog's ear even as flames climbed the fence behind them. Sean shielding him with his body, dragging him free before collapsing. It was quiet when the video ended. One of the older men in uniform stepped forward, a retired colonel, and placed a single white rose on the edge of the stage. "We failed that man," he said, "but we won't forget him." A few in the crowd began to nod. Then more. In the weeks since the raid, the truth had slowly made its way into the open. News reports uncovered the extent of Wade Holloway's operation. The dogs weren't stolen. They were discarded, sold by shadow contacts from multiple states. The money that built Holloway's veteran retreat had come off the backs of K9s forced into illegal transport runs. And the worst part, everyone had looked the other way because Wade had worn the right uniform and said the right things. But now, there was no more looking away. A child ran up to Axel as the crowd began to disperse. She stopped just short, crouched low, and whispered, "Thank you." Axel didn't move, but his ears turned toward her. A soft, acknowledging breath escaped his nose. Luke watched it all in silence. This moment of calm, of honesty, of people finally seeing what had been in front of them all along, this was what Sean had tried to protect. Not just Axel, not just one town, but the idea that service should mean something after the uniforms were folded away. As the sun began to dip behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the grass, Axel lay down by Luke's feet, still watching, still guarding. The fight was almost over, but the mission was just beginning. The morning mist hung low over Brook Hollow Cemetery, curling between the rows of weathered headstones like memory itself. Dew clung to the grass, and the cold quiet of fall had begun to settle over the town. Luke parked just outside the iron gate, opened the back hatch, and waited. Axel jumped down slowly, his gait stiff, his left side still favoring the scar tissue that had never quite healed. But he walked with purpose, no leash, no command, just instinct, just memory. They moved through the rows together. Same path, same destination. But something was different this time. There was a new headstone, a new inscription. Luke had spent months petitioning the town council. He didn't want a medal, or another ceremony, or any more talk of public closure. All he'd asked for was a new marker, one that said the truth, no longer hidden behind whispers and assumptions. The polished granite gleamed in the light. Beneath Sean's name it read, "Here lies a hero, loved by a partner who never forgot." Luke stood there for a long while, not saying anything, just listening to the wind tug at the trees, letting it carry the ghosts away. Axel sat beside him, one paw tucked under his chest, his breathing calm and steady. The patch over his eye had started to fray. Luke would fix it later. Or maybe not. Maybe it was time to leave it as it was, earned, not hidden. A soft rustle broke the silence behind them. Martha, the older woman in her knit shawl, silver hair twisted up with a hairpin that hadn't changed in 20 years. She came every week to visit her late husband's grave across the path, and every week she brought Axel a treat, though she insisted it was just coincidence they kept meeting here. Today, though, she held something different. A simple leather collar, worn but clean. On the front, a metal tag engraved with a single word, Guardian. "I found it in my husband's old things," she said, voice trembling. Used to belong to his old dog, Max. He was a military K9 too. Thought, maybe Axel should have it now. Luke crouched, looked Axel in the eye, and slowly clipped the collar in place. Axel didn't flinch. He just exhaled, slow and low, and leaned, ever so gently, against Luke's knee. Not for support, for connection. They stood there until the sun rose high enough to dry the dew, until the cemetery was just another patch of ground, and the memories had been said aloud. On the walk back to the car, Axel paused one last time, turned around, looked at the stone, then kept going. Somewhere down the road there'd be other missions, not like before, not battlefields or shootouts or dark warehouses in the middle of nowhere, but missions just the same. Helping young handlers train their first dogs, sitting quietly with veterans who didn't yet know they weren't alone, laying beside a child who couldn't sleep, not until someone, or something, was there to stand watch. The world still needed guardians, and Axel still had work to do. And maybe as you listen to this story, something in it stirs a memory of your own. A dog who waited by the door until you came home. A dog who laid their head in your lap when no one else noticed you were hurting. A dog who stayed. So let me ask you this. What about you? Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did? If that answers yes, or even if it's not yet, but you believe it could be someday, then you already understand why stories like Axel's matter. Because loyalty isn't loud. It doesn't wear medals or beg for applause. It just shows up. Every single time. If you've made it this far, we invite you to stay a little longer, subscribe to our channel, share Axel's story. Because somewhere out there, another K9 is still standing watch, and someone needs to hear that they're not forgotten. From all of us here at German Shepherd Stories, thank you for staying.